If you're watching this, you're already in too deep. I should probably start with a warning, but I know how this works. Curiosity always wins. That's how I ended up here, sitting in the dark with a file I was told to burn. I didn't. Now, I can't sleep. I can't even close my eyes without seeing her face, or hearing the echo of children's voices that never quite fade, no matter how loud I turn up the TV. This isn't a story you'll find in any history book. In fact, if you ask around, most people will swear it never happened. But there are things in these mountains that history books won't touch. Sister Prudence is one of them. The file in front of me is thick, yellowed, and smells like mildew and old secrets. It's stamped confidential in red, but the ink's faded, like even the warning itself is tired of trying to keep people out. I found it in the back of a locked drawer at my late uncle's house, tucked behind tax returns and a stack of brittle, handwritten letters. My uncle was a local historian, the kind who believed every ghost story had a kernel of truth. He used to say, "Some stories are too dangerous to tell, but even more dangerous to forget." I never understood what he meant until I saw the first photograph. It's a black and white shot of a woman in a nun's habit, standing at the edge of a foggy hill. Her face is turned just enough to catch the light, but her eyes are lost in shadow. There's something wrong with her smile. The caption reads, "Sister Prudence, 1952. Orphanage staff." I know what you're thinking, just another ghost story, right? But the more I read, the more I realized this wasn't just a story. It was a warning. Names crossed out. Children who vanished. Pages missing, as if someone tried to erase the truth but didn't quite finish the job. So, if you're still here, remember, some things aren't meant for daylight. Let me take you back to where it all began, before the disappearances, before the nightmares. The orphanage sat on a hill that always seemed to be wrapped in fog, even on the brightest mornings. Locals called it St. Agnes' Home for Children, but most just called it the place on the hill. If you asked anyone in town, they'd say it was a good place, clean, safe, run by God-fearing women who took in the lost and the unwanted. From a distance, it looked almost picturesque. Whitewashed walls, a neat little chapel, gardens bursting with wildflowers and vegetables. You could hear laughter drifting down the slope, the kind of laughter that makes you think of summer and scraped knees and games of tag that never end. But if you stood at the edge of the property, just where the gravel road turned to mud, you'd notice the silence underneath the laughter. The way the trees seemed to lean in, as if listening. The way the fog never quite lifted, no matter how hard the sun tried. Locals say the hill is cursed, but the real curse wore a habit. I remember the first time I saw the orphanage up close. I was 8, clutching a suitcase with a broken handle, my name stitched into the lining of my coat. The nuns greeted me with gentle smiles and soft voices. Sister Mary gave me a piece of hard candy and told me I'd be safe here. I almost believed her. The other children were quick to include me in their games, but there was a strange rhythm to their play. We never left the yard. The gates were always locked, even during the day. If a ball rolled too close to the fence, we were told to leave it. "It's not safe out there," the nuns would say, their voices tight. At night, the rules multiplied. No talking after lights out. No wandering the halls. If you heard footsteps, you were to stay in bed and close your eyes. Sometimes, I'd hear whispers through the walls, fragments of prayers, or maybe just frightened children trying to comfort each other. The building itself creaked and groaned, as if it was settling deeper into the earth, or maybe trying to shake something loose. The nuns tended the gardens during the day, their habits trailing through the rows of beans and tomatoes. They sang hymns as they worked, but the songs always sounded a little off-key, a little too slow. I once saw Sister Agnes burying something in the flower bed behind the chapel. She looked up and caught my eye, and for a moment, her face was as blank as the fog. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. Meals were quiet affairs. We ate in a long, drafty hall, the windows too high to see out of. The food was plain but filling: stew, bread, apples from the orchard. We said grace before every meal, and the prayers were always the same, word for word, as if we were reciting a spell instead of giving thanks. Sometimes, a child would be missing from the table. The nuns would say they'd been adopted, but no one ever saw a car pull up or heard the sound of goodbyes. I used to wonder why the children never left the grounds, why the gates were locked from the outside, why the air felt heavier the closer you got to the chapel. I told myself it was just my imagination, that every old building has its secrets. But the longer I stayed, the more I realized the secrets weren't in the walls, they were in the people. But the heart of the orphanage was Sister Prudence, and she was nothing like the others. I first saw Sister Prudence on my second morning at the orphanage. The other nuns wore gray habits, their faces soft and open, but she was different. Her habit was black as coal, pressed so sharply it looked like it could cut. She moved through the halls with a kind of gliding stillness, her hands folded, her eyes fixed straight ahead. The other nuns would nod or smile as they passed, but Sister Prudence never acknowledged anyone. She never blinked. Not once. I watched her for weeks, waiting for that flicker, that tiny sign of humanity, but it never came. The first time she spoke to me, I was standing in line for breakfast, fidgeting with the hem of my sleeve. She appeared at my side so suddenly I almost dropped my tray. "Hands at your sides," she said, her voice low and cold, like water running over stones. I did as I was told. Everyone did. There was something about her that made you want to shrink away, to make yourself invisible. The other nuns would pat your shoulder or ruffle your hair, but Sister Prudence never touched anyone. She didn't need to. Her presence was enough. The older kids had stories about her, whispered warnings traded under blankets after lights out. "She can hear your thoughts," one boy told me, eyes wide. "If you lie, she'll know." Another girl, Anna, swore she'd seen Sister Prudence standing outside her window in the middle of the night, just watching, her face pale in the moonlight. "She doesn't sleep," Anna whispered. "She just waits." Punishments were her specialty. If you broke a rule, talked back, snuck a cookie, left your bed after curfew, you'd be summoned to her office. The door would close and the rest of us would sit in silence, listening for the sounds that always followed. The scrape of a chair, the low murmur of her voice, the sharp, sudden crack of a ruler on wood. No one ever talked about what happened inside that room. Some kids came out with red eyes and trembling hands. Others didn't come out at all, at least not for days. When they did, they were quieter, smaller, as if something had been taken from them. I remember one afternoon, watching from the window as Sister Prudence led a group of us in prayer. The sun was shining, the garden full of color, but she stood in the only patch of shadow, her face unreadable. A little boy, Tommy, stumbled over his words, and she fixed him with a stare so intense he burst into tears. She didn't comfort him. She just waited until he finished, her gaze never wavering. Later, I heard her in the hallway, her footsteps echoing like a metronome, always in time, never hurried. The other nuns tried to soften her edges. Sister Mary would slip us extra bread. Sister Agnes would tell us stories about saints and miracles. But even they seemed wary of Prudence. I once saw Sister Mary flinch when Prudence entered the room, her hands tightening around her rosary. "She's strict, but she means well," Mary told me. But her eyes darted to the door as she spoke, as if she was afraid Prudence might hear. Rumors grew in the spaces between her appearances. Some said she'd been at the orphanage forever, that she'd never aged a day. Others claimed she'd come from another country, sent here after something terrible happened at her last post. The bravest among us would dare each other to sneak into her office, to find proof of her secrets, but no one ever did. The door was always locked, the key always on a chain around her neck. It wasn't just her discipline. It was the way the shadows seemed to follow her, pooling at her feet even in the brightest rooms, stretching long and thin down the corridors after she passed. I started to wonder if the darkness in the orphanage came from the fog outside, or from something much closer, something that wore a habit and never, ever blinked. The first disappearance happened in late October, when the nights grew longer and the fog pressed harder against the windows. It was Tommy, small, freckled, always clutching a wooden toy car he'd carved himself. He'd been at the orphanage longer than most, and he knew the rules better than anyone. But even Tommy couldn't hide his fear when the sun went down. He'd started hearing things at night, soft footsteps outside the dormitory, the creak of floorboards in empty halls, a low humming that seemed to seep through the walls. He told me once, voice trembling, "She stands outside my door. I can hear her breathing." The older kids warned him to keep his head down, to never look Sister Prudence in the eye. If she calls you to her office, don't argue, don't cry. Just do what she says and hope she lets you go. But Tommy was too scared to sleep, and fear makes you careless. One night, after lights out, he crept from his bed to use the bathroom. He never made it back. We all heard the screams. Only the nuns pretended not to. The sound cut through the silence like a knife, high, desperate, then suddenly choked off. I remember sitting up in bed, heart pounding, the other children frozen around me. No one dared move. The next morning, Tommy's bed was empty, the sheets neatly folded as if he'd never been there at all. At breakfast, Sister Prudence stood at the head of the table, her hands folded, her eyes sweeping over us. "Tommy has been adopted," she announced, her voice flat. "He's gone to a good family. We should be happy for him." The other nuns nodded, their faces carefully blank. But none of us believed it. No one had come to visit. No suitcases had been packed. Tommy's toy car was still on his pillow. After breakfast, I slipped away from the group and wandered the grounds, searching for any sign of him. The fog was thick, curling around the chapel like a living thing. Behind the building, half buried in the mud, I found Tommy's shoe. It was still warm. I picked it up, my hands shaking, and looked around, half expecting to see him running toward me, grinning, telling me it was all a joke. But the only thing I saw was Sister Prudence, standing at the edge of the garden, watching me with that same unreadable expression. That night, the whispers started. The children huddled together, trading theories in hushed voices. "He tried to run," someone said. "She caught him." Another girl claimed she'd seen Sister Prudence dragging something heavy across the floor of her office. "There was blood," she whispered, eyes wide. "She cleaned it up before morning." The official story was adoption, but the truth was written in the way the nuns avoided our questions, in the way the older kids flinched at the sound of footsteps in the hall. I tried to tell Sister Mary what I'd found, but she just pressed a finger to her lips and shook her head. "Don't ask questions," she whispered. "It's safer that way." I wanted to believe her, to believe that Tommy was safe and happy somewhere far away. But every time I closed my eyes, I saw his shoe in the mud, felt the weight of Sister Prudence's gaze. That was just the beginning. The vanishings became a pattern. By winter, the orphanage had settled into a rhythm that felt almost normal, at least during the day. We went to lessons, did our chores, and played in the yard under the watchful eyes of the nuns. The sun would catch on the frost and make the world look clean, almost magical. But as soon as dusk crept in, the air changed. The laughter faded, the shadows grew longer, and the rules grew stricter. No one talked about Tommy anymore, but his absence was a hole we all tiptoed around. It was at night that the real orphanage revealed itself. I started waking to the sound of footsteps in the hall, soft, measured, never hurried. Sometimes I'd hear the faintest hum, like a lullaby sung in a language I didn't know. One night, I heard Anna crying in her bed. I slipped over and whispered, "What's wrong?" She shook her head, eyes wide and glassy. "I saw her," she whispered. "Sister Prudence. She was in the chapel with candles. She was chanting. It wasn't Latin. It wasn't anything I've ever heard." I tried to tell myself Anna was dreaming, but the next night, I heard it too. A low, rhythmic chanting, rising and falling like the wind through the trees. I pressed my ear to the floorboards and felt the vibration in my bones. The next morning, I found a strange symbol scratched into the wood beneath my bed, a circle with jagged lines radiating out, like a sun drawn by someone who'd never seen the real thing. The older kids knew more than they let on. One afternoon, while we were supposed to be weeding the garden, I cornered Ben, the oldest boy left. "What's going on here?" I demanded. He looked at me for a long time, then finally said, "You ever hear of the old gods? The ones from before the missionaries came?" I shook my head. "My grandma used to say the mountains have their own rules, their own guardians. Some folks make deals. Some folks pay in blood." He glanced over his shoulder, lowering his voice. "We weren't just orphans. We were offerings." I laughed, but it sounded hollow. "That's just a story." Ben shrugged. "Maybe, but you ever wonder why the fog never leaves? Why the ground's always soft, even in summer?" He pointed to the chapel. "That's where it happens. Midnight, every new moon. Don't let her catch you watching." I started paying closer attention. The nuns would gather in the chapel after dark, their voices muffled behind thick wooden doors. Sometimes, I'd see flickers of candlelight through the stained glass, strange shadows moving across the walls. Once, I crept close enough to hear Sister Prudence's voice, deeper than usual, almost guttural, weaving through the others like a snake. I couldn't make out the words, but the sound made my skin crawl. One night, I saw her through a crack in the chapel door. She stood at the altar, arms raised, her face lit by a ring of candles. Her eyes glowed not with reflected light, but with something alive, something hungry. I stumbled back, heart hammering, and nearly ran into Sister Agnes. She grabbed my arm, her grip surprisingly strong. "You didn't see anything," she hissed. Go to bed. Now. Her face was pale, her lips pressed tight, but her eyes were full of fear, not for me, but for herself. The next day, I found another symbol, this time carved into the bark of the old oak behind the garden. I asked Anna if she'd seen it before. She nodded, whispering, they're everywhere. Under the floor, behind the altar, even on the stones by the gate. My brother said they keep something out. Or maybe in. She shivered. He's gone now. Like Tommy, I started to notice other things, too. The way the nuns would flinch at sudden noises. The way Sister Prudence's shadow seemed to move on its own, stretching and twisting even when she stood perfectly still. The way the air in the chapel felt thick, almost electric, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. I overheard Sister Mary and Sister Agnes arguing one night. This isn't what we signed up for, Mary whispered, her voice trembling. We're supposed to protect them. Agnes replied, we can't stop her. She's not like us. The words hung in the air, heavy and final. I started to wonder if Sister Prudence was even human. The way she moved, the way she seemed to know what we were thinking, the way her eyes glowed in the candlelight, it all felt wrong. Like she was wearing a mask, and underneath was something ancient and cold. Daytime became a performance, a fragile illusion of safety. But at night, the truth pressed in from all sides. The rituals, the symbols, the disappearances, they were all connected. I knew I was risking everything, but I couldn't stop. I had to know the truth. So I broke the rules. The Forbidden Wing was a place we only spoke of in whispers, a part of the orphanage that had been sealed off for as long as anyone could remember. The door at the end of the east hallway was always locked, its paint peeling. The key kept on a ring that never left Sister Prudence's side. We'd dare each other to touch the doorknob, to press our ears against the wood and listen for the secrets inside. But no one ever went in, at least, not until I did. It was a night thick with fog, the kind that pressed against the windows and muffled every sound. I waited until the dormitory was silent, the other children lost in uneasy dreams. My heart hammered as I crept down the hall, every step echoing louder than it should have. I'd stolen the key from Sister Prudence's office earlier that day, my hands shaking so badly I nearly dropped it. Now, standing in front of the forbidden door, I hesitated. The air was colder here, heavy with the scent of mildew and something metallic, like old blood. I slid the key into the lock and turned it. The door groaned open, revealing a corridor swallowed by darkness. I stepped inside, pulling the door shut behind me. The silence was absolute, broken only by the sound of my own breathing. The floorboards creaked under my feet, and the walls seemed to close in, pressing me forward. The corridor was lined with doors, each one warped and splintered, their numbers faded to ghosts. I passed a window, its glass so dirty it barely let in any light. The wallpaper was peeling, revealing strange symbols scratched into the plaster beneath, circles, jagged lines, names written in a shaky hand. I ran my fingers over them, feeling the grooves, the desperation etched into every letter. The walls were covered in names crossed out, one by one. Some I recognized, Tommy, Anna's brother, Ben. Others were unfamiliar, lost to time. Each name was followed by a date, and then a single, deep slash. I swallowed hard, my mouth dry. This was no record of adoptions. This was a tally. I moved deeper, the air growing colder with every step. At the end of the hall, a door stood slightly ajar. I pushed it open and stepped inside. The room was small, lit only by the moonlight filtering through a broken window. The floor was littered with relics, dolls missing eyes, shoes too small for any of us now, scraps of clothing stained and torn. In the corner, a circle of melted candles surrounded a pile of bones, small and brittle. My stomach twisted. I heard someone breathing behind the door, but I was alone. I spun around, pressing my back to the wall, every nerve on fire. The breathing stopped, replaced by a low, guttural whisper that seemed to come from the walls themselves. I couldn't make out the words, but the sound made my skin crawl. I stumbled out of the room, desperate to leave, but something caught my eye, a book, half buried under a pile of rags. I knelt and pulled it free, my hands trembling. It was a ledger, its cover cracked and stained. I flipped through the pages, my heart sinking with every name I read. Each child who had vanished was listed here, their names crossed out in thick, black ink. The last page was blank, except for a single word scrawled in the center. Offering. Suddenly, footsteps echoed down the hall, slow, deliberate, impossibly close. I froze, clutching the ledger to my chest. The air grew colder, the shadows deeper. I turned, and there she was, Sister Prudence, her face half hidden in shadow, her eyes burning with something I couldn't name. That's when I found the ledger, and Sister Prudence found me. She stood at the end of the corridor, framed by the darkness, her habit blending into the shadows so completely that for a moment, she seemed to be nothing but a pair of eyes and a pale, sharp smile. I clutched the ledger to my chest, my breath coming in short, ragged bursts. The air between us felt electric, charged with something ancient and cold. "You shouldn't be here," Sister Prudence said, her voice echoing off the walls, low and smooth as oil. She took a step forward, and the floorboards didn't creak beneath her feet. "Curiosity is a dangerous thing, child. It's what brings most of you to me, in the end." I tried to speak, but my mouth was dry. "What is this place?" I managed, my voice barely more than a whisper. "What are you doing to us?" She tilted her head, considering me. "This place is a sanctuary, a threshold, a bargain struck long before you or I were born." She smiled, and her teeth were wrong too many, too sharp, glinting in the half-light. "Children are precious to the old ones. Their fear, their hope, their innocence, it's a currency. And I am the collector." I took a step back, pressing myself against the wall. "You're not a nun," I said, the words trembling out of me. "You're not even human." She laughed, a sound that was almost musical, but with an edge that made my skin crawl. "Humanity is a mask like any other. I wear it because it suits my purpose, because it makes you trust me just enough." She moved closer, her eyes never leaving mine. "But you're different. You see more than the others. You ask questions. You break rules." I felt the ledger heavy in my hands, the names inside burning against my skin. "You can't keep doing this," I said, my voice growing stronger. "Someone will find out. Someone will stop you." She leaned in, her face inches from mine. I could smell the cold earth on her breath, the scent of something old and rotting. "No one will stop me. They never do. The mountain protects its own, and I am as much a part of it as the stones and the fog." She reached out, her fingers long and thin, and brushed a strand of hair from my face. Her touch was ice. I tried to pull away, but she held me fast. "You have a choice," she whispered, her voice suddenly soft, almost kind. "Join me. Help me keep the balance. Or vanish, like the others. It's easier than you think. All it takes is a word." I shook my head, tears stinging my eyes. I won't be like you." She smiled again, wider this time, her mouth stretching impossibly far. "You already are in some ways. You see the truth. You carry the ledger. You know the names." She leaned closer, her lips brushing my ear. "And I know yours. Your real name, the one you've never told anyone." My blood ran cold. I'd never spoken that name aloud, not since I was a child, not since before the orphanage. But she whispered it, each syllable a knife in the dark. I felt something inside me twist, as if she was reaching into my very soul. "Let me show you," she said, her voice a velvet trap. "Let me show you what waits in the dark. Let me show you what you could become." For a moment, I saw it, flashes of something vast and hungry, roots twisting through the earth, eyes watching from the fog, mouths whispering secrets in the dark. I saw myself, older, colder, standing at the head of a table, calling out names and crossing them off, one by one. "No!" I screamed, wrenching myself free. The ledger slipped from my hands, pages fluttering like wounded birds. I ran, stumbling down the corridor, the walls closing in around me. Behind me, I heard her laughter, low and triumphant. I burst through the forbidden door, slamming it shut behind me. My heart pounded in my chest, my lungs burning. I didn't stop running until I reached the dormitory, collapsing onto my bed, shaking and sobbing. I could still feel her touch on my skin, her voice in my ear, her secrets coiling in my mind. I survived, but I wasn't unscathed. I carried the memory of her smile, the sound of my real name, the weight of the ledger. I ran, but you can't outrun the mountain, or what lives on it. The orphanage closed the following spring. The official story was a burst pipe, black mold, a building too old and dangerous to save. The townspeople nodded, muttered about bad luck, and turned their eyes away from the hill. The children were scattered, sent to distant relatives, foster homes, or other institutions. I remember the day they loaded us onto the bus, the way the fog clung to the windows, refusing to let us go. No one looked back. We all knew better. They erased the records, but not the memories. The files vanished from the county office. The photographs disappeared from the local paper's archives. Even the sign at the bottom of the hill was taken down, the posts left to rot in the mud. If you ask anyone in town now, they'll tell you there was never an orphanage up there. Just an old church, long abandoned, nothing more. But I remember. We all do, in our own haunted ways. I tried to talk about it once. Years later, sitting across from a therapist who smiled too much and wrote everything down. I told her about the disappearances, the rituals, the ledger. She nodded, said it was trauma, that children invent stories to make sense of pain. But I know what I saw. I know what I survived. Sometimes I see her in my dreams. Sometimes I wake up with dirt under my nails. The other children scattered like seeds in the wind. Some I found again, years later, in online forums and late-night message boards. We compared stories, pieced together what we could. Ben never made it out of the system. Anna changed her name and moved across the country. A few of us tried to dig deeper, to find proof, but the trail always went cold. Names erased, buildings demolished, witnesses gone silent. It was as if the mountain itself had swallowed the truth. But every so often, a new story would surface. A missing child in a distant town. A nun in black, seen at the edge of a playground, her face always turned away from the camera. A ledger found in an abandoned church, the names inside crossed out, one by one. I started to wonder if Sister Prudence was ever really gone, or if she'd simply moved on, finding new places to haunt, new bargains to keep. The community never spoke of what happened. The adults who'd worked at the orphanage faded into the background, their lives marked by quiet, inexplicable tragedies. Fires, accidents, sudden illnesses. The kind of bad luck that clings to a place long after the people have left. The mountain grew wilder, the fog thicker. Sometimes, hikers would go missing, their campsites found abandoned, their names never added to any official list. I grew up, but the fear never left me. It changed shape, became quieter, but it was always there, a shadow at the edge of my vision, a chill in the air on foggy mornings. I learned to live with it, to carry it like a scar. But I never forgot. I never let myself believe the official story, because I know what's out there. I know what waits in the dark, what wears a habit and a smile that's just a little too wide. I know that evil doesn't die. It just changes its name, finds a new hill, a new set of children to watch over. But that's not the end. Not for me. Not for you. I still have the ledger. It sits on the shelf above my desk, wrapped in an old pillowcase, the pages brittle and stained. Sometimes, late at night, I take it down and run my fingers over the names. Most are crossed out, the ink thick and final. But there are a few that remain, names I recognize, names I don't, and a handful that seem to shift when I look at them too long. As if the letters are trying to rearrange themselves into something I can't quite read. If you've watched this far, your name is in the ledger now. That's how it works. Stories are hungry things. They need listeners, believers, witnesses. Every time someone hears the truth, the ledger grows. Every time someone remembers, the cycle continues. Maybe you think you're safe, sitting in your room, the glow of your screen keeping the darkness at bay. But the truth is, the story is already inside your head. You can feel it, can't you? That chill at the back of your neck, the sense that you're not alone, even now. I used to wonder what I would do if she came for me again. If I heard her footsteps in the hall, her voice whispering my real name. What would you do if she came for you? Would you hide under the covers, pretend you never heard this story? Or would you face her, demand answers, try to break the cycle? Maybe you'd do better than I did. Maybe you'd find a way to end it for good. I want to believe that's possible. I want to believe that someone, somewhere, will be brave enough to finish what I started. So tell me, what do you think happened on that hill? Have you heard stories like this before? Leave your theories, your nightmares, your warnings in the comments. Maybe together, we can piece together the truth. But remember, some names in the ledger are waiting to be crossed out. Maybe you'll be the one to break the cycle. Or maybe you're next. The mountain is still there, shrouded in fog, its secrets buried deep beneath the roots and stones. People drive past the old road now, barely glancing at the overgrown path that once led to St. Agnes. They say the land is cursed, but no one remembers why. Or maybe they just pretend not to. The truth is, the mountain never forgets. Neither does she. Sometimes, on cold nights, I dream I'm back there walking the halls, hearing the distant echo of children's laughter swallowed by the mist. Sometimes, I wake to the sound of chanting, low and rhythmic, pulsing through the walls. I tell myself it's just the wind, just the memory playing tricks. But deep down, I know better. Some stories don't end. They wait, patient as stone, for someone new to listen. If you've been here before, if you remember the story of the Hollow Man, or the girl who vanished in the old coal mine, you know how these things go. The details change, but the hunger stays the same. Maybe you laughed at the warnings, or maybe you left the lights on, just in case. Maybe you one of the few who has seen the shadow at the edge of your window, or heard your name whispered in the dark. If you hear chanting in the night, don't answer. If you see a woman in black at the edge of the woods, don't look away. Some stories are hungry, some stories are patient, and some, like Sister Prudence, are always watching, waiting for the next name to be written down. So share your theories below. Tell me what you think happened on that hill. Have you heard of Sister Prudence? Or is she already watching you, right now, from the corner of your eye? The mountain is waiting. The story isn't finished, and neither are you.